as I know lots of people don't like their camera on. Just going to welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. We should be starting the meeting in maybe one more minute, so 1:33. Does that work? And welcome everyone. I'm Aaron Bruff from the Data and Statistics here at the Utah State Board of Education. Thank you for joining us. Callista, you want to, I believe you're driving, you want to advance it to the next slide? Go back one, we'll just hit everyone knows this, but make sure you mute your mic, raise your hand if you have a question, or obviously jump into the chat and share along. Next slide, if you don't mind. But again, welcome. Thank you for being here. We'll be talking about these 10 items. Graduation audit on credits, graduation rates, S1X, how-to documents for each SIS, change to birth certificate guidance, LEAs need to report transfer credit data accurately, the S alternative assessment 1% threshold, OSEP indicator changes, updates the TREX validation, the December 1 UTREX data submission and training, and items from the LEAs. Go ahead and move to the next slide. I believe it's Kristen. Kristen, are you here?
I am here.
Awesome, thank you. all you now.
All right, thank you. And this isn't really a graduation audit per se, it was more like a graduation credit review. There is graduation requirements require that all students in grades 9 through 12 shall earn a minimum of 24 units of credit through course completion or competency assessment consistent with Rule 277705. And there's the link if you want to see the requirements. Next slide. So as a review this year, we went and looked at the 2022 graduates, and we limited it to students who were enrolled in public ed in grades 9 through 12, who graduated at end of year, no summer grads. And we counted all credits, regardless of where the student was enrolled when the credit was earned. Next slide. The median average credit was 21.6, which is a little bit below 24. Different LEAs ranged from 10 credits per graduate to 32 credits per graduate. And some of the LEAs that have the highest graduation rates had average earned credit less than 20. So this is a little problematic. Next slide. We think this is a data problem. We do recognize there are courses that don't show up in UTREX, but were earned. But we also realize that we think we're lower than we should be. 61 of 84 LEAs were less than 24 credits. And 36 were less than 20 credits. This is not, we are not auditing this right now, but it is becoming an issue with graduation credit and questions about students. Next slide, I will tell you about how to reach out. You can contact me to see what your LEA average was. I forgot to put my email on there, but and I will tell you, and if you're fine, then it's great. If you're lower than you think you should be, you might want to see what is not getting loaded up into UTREX. We think it must be something more of an issue, that courses are just not being included, or we're seeing courses that are not being marked as credit earned, attempted, and credit earned. Are there any questions? I will put my email address in the chat.
Kristen, Stacy just asked, will you be reaching out to LEAs to let them know, or do they just need to contact you?
I can actually have them contact me, because I don't want to advertise if somebody's not doing well. Are there any other questions? Okay, that was all I had.
Thank you.
Oops. Okay, so David and I run the graduation rates, and we just have a couple announcements. So we have finished running the final grad rates for the 2022 cohort, and that includes both the federal 4-year and 5-year rates. LEAs can preview the final grad rate data for cohort 22 prior to it being released publicly. And there's a couple of ways for you to do that. We did send Move It files out this week to all LEAs. They were placed in the distribution folders, in the accountability, and then the SURF folder. And there's 2 files. The other place is on the data gateway, the graduation rate preview report. It will be updated with the final data. There's currently a ticket in for that to be completed, but I know that it's close. So that report should be updated either by the end of this week, if not end of this week, by next week. But I know they are working on that. It is the same data in that report as in the Move It files. So either place, you will see the same data. And then the final state graduation rate for cohort 22 will be publicly released at the end of this month, and LEA and school grad rates will be reported in December. Okay, so just some other notes on the reports for where you can look at your grad rate data. So again, the graduation rate preview report is on the data gateway. It's under the My Tools link. I don't believe it's currently grayed out. It just has the data from year end still. So once that is updated, it will reflect all changes that were made in the October submission. And again, that should be happening soon. IT is working on that ticket now. And again, the 2 files that were sent out through Move It. One file is student level data, and that one is called high school completion status. Some LEAs might have gotten that file that actually don't have a grad rate. If you fall into that boat, you don't really need to worry about it. But for LEAs that actually have a grad rate, the student level file is very useful because you can look at the actual students and not just your final percentage. And then the second file is the aggregate file, or the actual grad rate percentages by school and by subgroup. Another report that's there year round is the graduation rate for 4 years report. The only downfall is it's not live, so it doesn't point to live data. It basically gets updated after the 3 UTREX submission periods. But it does have data for current cohorts, so 2023 and on. And then there is the graduation rate for 5 years report, which is also on the data gateway under year-round reports. This report, the purpose of it is to show students that were retained in 2021 and whose 5th year was 2022 and what happened to them. But that's the only reason that that we use the 5-year rate. So if you have questions on that, you can ask us. And then there's the USBE graduation rate report, which again, we have not yet released that. That will be put up on the website in December, and that is used for the superintendent's annual report. The difference that this report also shows the graduation rates by the LEA and school level, not just at the state. And then there is a state graduation rate dashboard on Tableau. This is also available on the data gateway, but it's not currently updated with the 2022 data. We're just waiting for the public release, and then we will go ahead and put the most recent data on that dashboard. And then there is an LEA grad rates dashboard. The one on Data Gateway is just the state rates, but the LEA grad rates dashboard is on the Tableau server, so that one is not public. You actually have to log in. And again, that will be available after sometime in December. All right, are there any questions? Let's see. Is it too late to make changes? If you're talking about 2022, yes, it's too late in the sense that that is already considered final, unless we give you these files to review now before the public release, because if you find an error on our end, then we want to fix that. But if it's something that was not updated, then yes, it's too late. And then for the year 23 cohort report, can currently enrolled students show as enrolled instead of dropped? Okay, I see what you're saying. So yeah, on the future cohort report, it does show the students as dropouts because they're currently enrolled and they haven't received a completion status or exit code in most cases yet. So that's something that we would have to look into with the UTREX team. But as of right now, the reason why it shows that way is because those students haven't even finished this school year yet. So that's something that we could look at and see if there's other options, but we had historical updates showing CV graduation and none appear in the report. Okay, Robert, if you want to contact me and David directly, we can look into that for you. Same, if you have specific students that you have questions about, you can contact me and David directly with the SSID. But in general, in the case, if there is a duplicate SSID issue and it was not merged prior to the October submission, then yes, that will count against you if that did not get merged in time. All right, any other questions about graduation rate reporting or data? You can always contact me and David personally if you do have questions. All right, so I'll move on to the next item. So this is actually a topic that we brought up last year, and I believe Lindsay was the one who presented on this. So I'm just following up because we find that there's lots of questions about how to do S1X record updates. And because we do have different SIS systems across the state, it's really useful for us to know, how to help you when you're trying to do those S1X record updates. And sometimes if there's other LEAs that are using your same SIS, it's just helpful to have a document that has good instructions that are specific to your SIS. So last year, at the time of this meeting, we did have a how-to document for how to do S1X record updates for Aspire and Compass. And I apologize, I'm not entirely sure if some of these other SIS did end up responding to Lindsay, but I couldn't find anything in her folder or in our shared folder. So if you did send that, I would just ask if you wouldn't mind sending that again. And then if you haven't sent that, if there's anyone from Power School, Infinite Campus, or Skyward, we would love to just get a good how-to document on how to do S1X record updates. And if you have questions on what that might look like, I can show you the example of the Aspire one. But it would just be a good thing for us to have on file for everyone's shared knowledge. And then we don't necessarily need files from the individual SIS systems. So Davis, Discover, Grade Quick, Severe, but unless you want those, you can go ahead and send those to us. And Malia said we do have one from Davis. So it looks like we have Aspire, Compass, and Davis. So we're just missing Power School, Infinite Campus, and Skyward. So if there are volunteers, people that have time and want to do that for us before year end, that would be very helpful for everyone. So we can keep track of how to do those record updates in the various SIS systems. Thank you, Stacy, for volunteering for Power School. That's great. Do we have any volunteers for Infinite Campus or Skyward?
Russ Graham volunteered for Infinite Campus.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Russ.
Who's going to follow up on this? Is that you?
Yeah, I can follow up.
Thank you.
Any takers for Skyward? All right, well, we can keep following up on that. And thank you to Russ and Stacy for offering to do that. All right. And next we have, well, I'll turn back to you, Aaron.
Thank you. I believe Ben is with us. Ben, are you here?
I am here. Aaron asked me to talk to you a little bit about House Bill 230, which changed the requirements for verifying birth certificates a little bit. Previously, there was a requirement that you verified birth certificate, and then if there was not sufficient proof provided by parents, there was a requirement to turn the case over to law enforcement for human trafficking issues. The new bill has changed that up a little bit. It's kind of got a three-tiered process. In a perfect world, the parent or guardian provides the birth certificate, and your school or your school district is going to verify that birth certificate, verify that the parents are who is listed on the birth certificate, and then you record that in the system. If they don't provide a birth certificate, there are alternative documentation that can be provided. They can provide an affidavit that says why there is no birth certificate, and then provide other evidence that establishes the student's age and birth date in relationship to the parents. That can be documents from a physician or hospital, entry in a family religious text, adoption records, certain school records and immunization records, social documentation from a social service provider, or documentation from a consulate. So if they have those, you'll want the parents to fill out an affidavit explaining why there isn't a birth certificate, and then you take the documentation they have, and your school verifies the relationship with the parents, and they're good to go. If they still can't establish the information that's necessary, especially regarding the student's age, gender, and birth information, then it requires the school to have a review team to look over evidence that's available to make some determinations. This is at least a 3-person team that includes somebody that's had training on human trafficking and what to look for there. Who can be on this team is spelled out in the statute. It can be administrator, teachers, social workers, counselors, psychologists, a few other people as necessary to figure that out. That team would then try and make a determination as to how old the kid is or the student is, what the birth date is based on the evidence is available, who the parents are, and that team also looks to see if there's any indication that there's been any human trafficking that needs to be reported. If that team can establish the information needed, that would be the final step that then could be reported in the documentation system. So it's a little more, there's a few more steps to the process than there used to be. It's basically spelled out in the statute, but happy to answer any questions if I can that you may have.
Just sharing with the group, we have presented in the past about the updated guidance, in particular with students from basically refugee status or what have you. The Aspire system also, or the Aspire SIS, was updated to make sure it wasn't, you have to have birth certificate only. It's a birth certificate or other legal documentation components. And this relates to what Ben is sharing. So
a couple questions in the chat. Usually birth certificates, how can we verify birth certificates for authenticity? Usually birth certificates are going to be certified documents, and that's what you'd look for. I think you'd verify the parents with some ID is that they have a driver's license or similar ID that shows they're the parent listed in the birth certificate. If you have questions about how to verify a birth certificate, I'd probably recommend contacting the Department of Health to see. They can tell you what to look for there. They're the ones that, I think that's who issues the birth certificates. And then, Aaron, do you have any suggestions on the? I know the statute refers to a training that they're going to have. Do you know who offers that training? Is that coming through us at some point, or how's that training offered? Do you know?
That training, my understanding, is being led by Christelle Estrada and Brian Quisenberry, I believe, are in the process of putting that training together. I know that there was discussion, and it wasn't data and statistics, it was putting that together. So where that's at, I'm not sure, but I do know that they're working on that process. So once it's done, though, we're happy to share that information, obviously, with when we have one of our meetings. So
we have a question on whether they have to physically present the birth certificate. My understanding is that yes, they do. The statute requires the school to inspect the birth certificate, I believe, and then you'd enter the person that's entering that into your data system would verify that they viewed the birth certificate and confirmed everything. So my understanding is that does have to be physically presented. They have to provide a certified copy of the student's birth certificate. So doing that would not, I don't think would allow that to be done by email or electronically.
It's an interesting question that they bring up. Is there anything in the new statute about having to see it in person?
Well, I think where the parent has to provide a certified copy, that would have to be a physical copy. As to Stacy's comment, I don't think that an electronic copy would be other reliable proof on the birth certificate, where the statute specifically requires a certified copy on the birth certificate. But if that's I mean, that's a good question though.
We might need to circle back and come back with an answer. We'll let some legal heads. Paula's got a comment as well. Go ahead, Paula.
We reached out to the Attorney General and he said that electronic copy he did not feel like was adequate.
Yeah, given the language of the statute, that doesn't surprise me.
Was that Brian Quisenberry?
Yes.
Paula? Okay. Again, they're putting some training together. And when we have that training, we'll share that with the rest of the group.
Either the question from Michelle is, does the parent have to drive the certificate in? I mean, the other option would be to FedEx mail. I mean, there's other ways to get you the certified copy of the birth certificate. There may be some logistical issues there. Yeah, Stacy, you're right.
Great questions. We'll share that with Brian and the rest of the team as they're putting stuff together. Go ahead.
Paula?
Go ahead.
Dr. Estrada said that in the cases of other countries to please reach out to her and that she can assist you.
Russell, from the sounds of things, what the AGs have told Paula is that online copies are not going to be acceptable. They need to have a physical copy of the certified copy of the birth certificate.
Yeah, the AG even said the coloring of the birth certificates are critical too. So the color coding and etc.
That's why you want to see the certified copy, because it has certain indicia that hasn't been faked. As to whether it applies to foreign exchange students, I'm not sure if they have a different process. I think this applies to any student in the schools, but I would check with our foreign exchange guy. His name is escaping me right now, but they would be able to give you guidance on that. You don't keep a copy of the birth certificate, Craig. What the statute says and what the guidance says is you have to verify the information in it. You record in the system that you've inspected the system, and I think then that after that, you're able to return the birth certificate to the parents, is my recollection. Yeah, just in response to the question on the CUME file again, my understanding is it would be returned. I'm not aware of any requirement to keep that birth certificate in that file. And then Logan, as to your question again, I think that might be something that needs to be addressed down the road. I don't know if that's something that could be addressed by rule, or if they need to revisit the legislation, but there's no way to really verify the certification of the documents online. As far as questions about whether you can take the documents from other schools, looks like, as I read the statute, you would need to see the birth certificate when they enroll in your school. I don't think relying on the fact that they showed at the prior school is sufficient, because it says upon enrollment of a student in a first time in a particular school. So I think you couldn't rely on a prior school, would be my understanding. The committee verification could allow some flexibility depending on how that's interpreted. But I don't think the committee is meant to be able to bypass the birth certificate requirement for online students. This is HB 230, Craig. Yes, Russell, there were different requirements in the past. This would have started on May 4th of last year would be generally when that gets implemented. I'm just checking to see if there was a different implementation date. But yeah, this would have started in May of last year. Anything else on the birth certificates? Okay, I'll turn it back to you, Aaron.
Hey, thank you. And thank you for these great questions. We'll definitely be sharing them with this group that's doing the training on that. And we'll see how things work or move forward with that. So again, Ben, thanks for joining us. Reporting transfer credits and data accurate. Go ahead and move to the next slide if you don't mind. So credits earned by a student somewhere else, not your LEA, during a given school year needs to be added to your SIS record, which basically means if the kid's somewhere else and they're earning credit, they're doing the SOAP or another, whatever it is, make sure you're adding it to your records. Credits earned by students somewhere else outside of the school year need to be added to your SIS. However, if the student is no longer enrolled at your LEA, you still need to add it to your SIS and notify the other LEA that the student transferred to. These data cannot be sent to UTREX. So when I say these data, we're talking about prior year information. The simple reason why is UTREX is designed only to collect current year data. These cases of additional credits from prior year currently have no way to be reported and saved into our state database. We actually talked about this at length the other day about options and possibilities of getting the information saved to the state. And the answer behind it is, well, USIMS is coming online. When I say USIMS is coming online, a number of you are involved with the USIMS developments as we're trying to address these issues. And this fix is basically one of the components that we are looking at the new USIMS collection. So again, just sharing out, it's important that transfer credits are saved in your SIS. And that interoperability where it automatically transfers back and forth between state record and then back out to another LEA and transfer again is something that is coming. So if there's questions, let me know. Go ahead and move to the next slide. Move back.
Sorry about that.
What happened? No, back.
I went to click and instead it just started scrolling.
Yay. Anyway, let's see. Yes, one more. Okay. And then a question came in Is there any board rule for parent guardian data being submitted into UTREX? That was an interesting question that came in. The reference I'm giving here is R27744, which is the data standards. In section 6, it says, official data source and required LEA compatibility inside of there. In section 7, by reference, it says the LEA should submit daily updates to the board clearinghouse using the school interoperability framework, SIF, objects defined in the UTREX clearinghouse specification. So what this means, and there's the link to that. Not sure if you're having individuals pushing back saying, I don't want you sending guardian information, or it's complicated. We got 2 guardians in here and they're fine. Understand the purpose of getting the parent guardian information primarily is to help individuals who have hit economic hard times, and we are able to contact those families via Department of Workforce Services, who have the food stamp information that goes back out to the parents, or if that can't be found, then the information comes back to the child nutrition program, and they work to try to identify and get that those resources back to those families as they can. The resources are not allocated to the students directly, they're allocated to the family. So that's why the parent guardian information has been added to the UTREX specification and requested to be submitted. So if you are running into an issue and someone says, I don't want to give that information, not sending it in there, well, there's the error or the warning you can take on it. But going back to board rule by reference is how that's in there. So it's not actually documented saying absolutely you have to send it in there, written black and white within board rule, but by reference you can see that information is there. Any questions on this? All right, thank you. Go ahead and move to the next slide.
Hello. Okay, so I have quite a lot to present, so bear with me here. The first thing is about the ESSA alternate assessment 1% threshold. Most of this is a review of information I share every year around this time, although there is an impending change coming up that you want to make note of. So the 1% cap requirement started in school year 2018, that now we're only allowed to have 1% of students tested with the alternate assessment. And this rate is based on the data we submit through EdFacts, which includes grades 3 through 8 and 10 for math and language arts, and grades 4 through 8 and 10 for science. So the state is subject to that rule where we can only have 1% of students tested with an alternate assessment, but the state can't require LEAs to cap the alternate assessment participation at 1%. So if you're over 1%, what you are going to be required to do is to submit a justification letter to USBE. This is done through our special ed department, and the notifications this year have already been sent out to special ed directors in the LEAs that need to submit a justification letter. The due date to return the justification letter is January 4th. And in that letter, they're gonna need to include current year alternate assessment projections. So for the upcoming 2023 school year assessment. Okay, so the data that's from the justification letter is going to be used to determine monitoring. And also December 1 child count data is used. So a third of LEAs who exceed the 1% participation will be monitored, and will select specific schools and students to be monitored. And then the eligibility and IEPs for those selected students need to be uploaded to UPIP document storage, which is where the specialists on this will review them from there. USC will also do some on-site monitoring. And this item here that's highlighted in yellow, this is the one where we have an upcoming change. So this is a regular part of our December data reviews. We look for students with the specific learning disability or emotional disturbance disability type who are marked as 1%. These ones are not supposed to be marked as 1%. And so actually, if you have students marked as 1%, that is one of the items that could be used to trigger your LEA to be selected for monitoring. Okay, so the definitions for these two disability types are not compatible with identification of a student with a significant cognitive disability. So that's why we include that, we flag it in your courtesy reviews. The definition for specific learning disability says that it does not include learning problems that are primarily the result of intellectual disability. The definition for emotional disturbance means a condition that adversely affects a student's educational performance, in an inability to learn that cannot be explained by intellectual, sensory, or health factors. And the definition of significant cognitive disability, the student has a significantly impacted intellectual functioning. So the two aren't compatible. For more information about the significant cognitive disability definition or those other disability type definitions, the last slide had the link to the special education rules, and then this slide here has the link to board rule where it's defined. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've held off on making this a fatal error because we haven't wanted to block Scrum records from getting into UTREC. If the IEP team makes the decision that the student has one of these two disability types and is in need of the alternate assessment, that's going to change. Starting next year, we're going to add a fatal error. And so if your IEP team comes to this conclusion, then they're going to have to meet again, and they're going to have to go through the eligibility determination process again and come up with either a different disability type for the student, or if they are one of these two disability types, they're not eligible for alternate assessment. Okay, so back to the justification and monitoring process. What this means for you is in your December data, make sure that that 1% data is as accurate as possible. Your special ed directors need to use that data to write their justification letters, and it will be used by the USB Special Education Department to determine monitoring visits. If you have any students with disability types BD or SL who are marked 1%, bring it to your special education director's attention. If it's a data error, that's easy, get it updated. If that's the determination that the IEP team made, then they'll need to plan on starting the determination process again to try to correct that. And then also you'll want to work with your special ed directors to analyze your current year data. They're going to need, if they have to write a justification letter, they're going to need to include the calculated projected current year alternate assessment rate for each subject area. And they're going to need to collect and submit required documents to UPIP. And Russ has question, will the SLBD students with 1% be on the courtesy review? Yes, it will. So the alternate assessment calculation. So like I said, do it separately for each of the subject areas. And the calculation, the official calculation that's used is based on the EdFacts data, which is might be a little hard for you to match it exactly. That's okay if your projected rates don't end up matching exactly what the EdFacts data ultimately ends up having. We understand. And then also in December, I mean, that's some students might leave before testing sessions start. Other students might enroll after now and before testing sessions start. So it's not expected to be an exact number. It's just a projection. The numerator would be all the students that you are expecting them to take an alternate assessment this year based on the December 1 enrollment. And the denominator would be all of your students who you're expecting to take a test in the indicated grades on this slide. And just as an FYI, opt-out students aren't included in the denominator in this rate. We know that's confusing because some different accountability items include opt-out and others don't. For this one, opt-out students aren't included in the denominator. Also, something that's different with this one compared with other accountability, first year English language learner students are excluded from the language arts denominator. They aren't excluded from math or science. Okay, so just to give you a picture of how we did as a state in 2022 compared with previous years. You can see 2018, the first year that this went into effect, we dropped below 1% as a state. So that's great. We've never had to get flagged for being over 1% as a state. The rates went down from 2018, 2019 to 21, and they're back up a little bit in 2022. The number of LEAs that had to write justification letters went down mostly from 2017 to 2019. 2017 is projected. That's what it would have been had that rule been in place in 2017. And then it went back up a little bit in 2021 and 2022. Here's some resources to learn more about the alternate assessment, participation guidelines, definition of significant cognitive disability, TA document to help kind of an FAQ really of who is a student with a significant cognitive disability. The USDE Special Education Assessment webpage, of course, has information about the alternate assessments. And then for any data questions about the 1% flag or those disability types, feel free to contact me. For questions about the alternate assessment, contact Tracy. Okay, so my next item is about OSEP indicator changes. Last year, I talked about the indicator 3 changes. This year, changes really have to do with that we're going through a process of updating our system to submit the IDEA EdFact files through Generate. And here's a link if you want to learn more about Generate. A large part of our work for submitting through Generate is just making sure that we're submitting our data correctly according to the EdFact specifications. For some of the changes, for some of the files, the changes will only have minor impacts on EdFact data, but others could be more notable. We've completed the process of setting up our disciplinary removal files to be submitted through Generate, and those updates that we made had very minimal impacts on the data. The changes to the special education exeter file, on the other hand, are going to be more substantial. Okay, and I'm going to talk about that as well as how it impacts OSEP indicators 1 and 2, which are the graduation and dropout rates. Okay, so the data source for indicator 102 is the EdFact 009 file, the Children with Disabilities Exiting Special Ed file. And there's a link to the specifications if you want to see that for yourself. That's due in early November. The LEA data that's used for that file is has to be updated by October 1. And the definition for this file is the unduplicated number of children with disabilities who are ages 14 through 21 and were in special education at the start of the reporting period. Note this little 1 right there. That's going to be our first update. And we're not in special ed at the end of the reporting period. Okay, so update 1. In special education at the start of the reporting period, we were missing this detail from the specifications before. So what does it mean to be enrolled at the start of the reporting period? So we worked through this and come up with a definition that the student is enrolled at the start of the reporting period if they have a SCRAM entry date on or before October 1 of the school year, and if their enrollment had greater than 10 days of membership, or between 1 and 10 days of membership with greater than 0 days of attendance. And we're only including the students if it's a school of record. So if it's marked school of record, no, it wouldn't be included. But realistically, we really shouldn't see any SCRAM records tied to an enrollment record that's marked school of record. No, the SCRAM record should always be in the school of record. Okay, so in the 009, these are the exiter types. Graduate with a high school diploma, graduate with the alternate diploma, receive a certificate, transfer to regular ed, and you can see this is one that has update 2, reach maximum age, died, moved known to be continuing, which has our update 3, and dropout. And then summer dropouts are also in that same dropout category. I just list them here separately because I have another slide where I want to cover what it means to be a summer dropout in more detail. Okay, so but first let's go over update 2. So we were previously coding the transfer to homeschool codes as the MKC exiter type, moved known to be continuing. But after a close scrutiny of the EdFact specifications, we noticed that this actually isn't correct according to their instructions, which say that transfer to regular education, this also includes students who left school to be homeschooled and are no longer receiving any special education services, including related services. So we changed the transfer to homeschool codes to go in that transfer to regular ed exiter type instead of the moved known to be continuing exiter type. Okay, and then for update 3, we were previously including students who are transferring within an LEA as exiters in the moved known to be continuing exiter type. However, the EdFact specs say for moved known to be continuing that these students moved out of the catchment area or otherwise transferred to another district and are known to be continuing in an educational program. And we learned that catchment area can be defined as either the state or as LEAs. And the recommendation is to use LEAs as the catchment area. That's what most states do. And we'll go ahead and do that as well. And so that means that the exit codes that are for students who are just changing schools or they're just changing tracks within the same school are being removed from this file. If we went with state as the catchment area, we would also remove the exit codes for students who are continuing in another school in the state. That's the transfer to a charter or the transfer to another school in the state codes. Okay, so this is the summer dropout slide. So summer dropouts are students who exited in such a way that we would expect them to return to school either in the following school year or in another USBE institution, but they don't have an enrollment by October 1. So these are students who have a high school completion status of RA or RT, the retained seniors, or their high school completion status is blank and the exit code is promoted, transfer within LEA, transfer under NCLB, transfer to charter, transfer to school in another LEA, transfer tracks within the school. Or the high school completion status and exit codes are both blank. Okay, so for the EdFacts data submission, we have an order of operations that we follow for identifying which exit type to assign to the student. The first item in the order of operations is looking for a Scram exit code of A, which means that they've returned to regular placement. If they have the Scram exit code of A, we're going to use that. We're going to ignore everything else in their high school completion status or exit code field. If they don't have a Scram exit code of A, we're going to look next at their high school completion status code. And if it's a certificate of completion, a dropout, or one of the graduate codes, then we'll use that. Otherwise, if the high school completion status is blank and the exit code is one of these ones here on this large list, transfer to adult ed, homeschool, died, dropout, expelled, foreign exchange student, exit, take a GED, transfer to higher ed, transfer out of country, transfer to homeschool, transfer out of state, transfer to private school, transfer to a charter school, transfer within state, transfer to a Utah Technical College, unknown, or withdraw, then we'll use that. Otherwise, we look at the determination of whether the student was a dropout. So if they're a summer dropout, then we use that. And if the students aren't identified in steps 1 through 4, then they're not an exiter and we won't include them in the file. Okay, so update 4 is that we changed the order of operations to look for that Scram exit code of A. So we used to have students, this used to be last in the order of operations, and what it resulted in is that these students were being counted for statuses that happened much later in the year than when they exited special ed. And the change in the order of operations ensures that these students will be properly coded as transfer to regular placement in the EdFacts file. Okay, so update 3 on that slide, the order operations slide, you can see there that it's implemented that we removed the TD and the TT codes from step 3 in our order of operations. So the move known to be continuing is limited to students who leave the catchment area. And since we're defining that as it should say LEA-wide, not district-wide, TD and TT should not be included in step 3 for the files since they are for students who transferred within the same school or district. Note that you could have a student with the TD or TT exit code who ultimately ends up in the exiter file, but that's because they ended up being identified as a summer dropout. Okay, so EdFacts requires an unduplicated count. So that means for each student, we have to narrow it down to a single enrollment record to use for them. And so we use tiebreakers. And the first tiebreaker is we look for the latest exit date. Next tiebreaker, if there's a couple different enrollment records with the same latest exit date, then we look at how early the entry date was on that record. Then we'll look for greatest total membership. we'll give preference to school of record over school of record no. We'll look for greatest attendance, highest cumulative GPA, and earliest warehouse entry date. The Scrum records also have tiebreakers applied. For the Scrum, because the enrollment record could have more than one Scrum record tied to it, and so we look for the Scrum record with the latest exit date out of the multiple Scrum records. And that next one really should never come into play since we can't have overlapping Scrum records. Okay, so update 1 is implemented after we do those tiebreakers. So the records that win the tiebreaker are only used if the student was enrolled at the start of the reporting period. And again, the definition that we're using is that they have to have the Scrum entry date on or before October 1 of the school year. Their total membership needs to be more than 10 days, or they have to have a combination of total membership between 1 and 10 days and greater than 0 days of attendance. And school of record can't be no. Okay, so EdFax requires us to calculate the age in a way that we had previously missed before. So this is change number 5. They require us to calculate the age on the date of the most recent IDEA child count prior to exiting special ed. So for students whose exit date was on or prior to December 1 of the school year, we use the prior year December 1 as the age calculation date. For students whose exit date was after December 1 of the current school year, we use the current year December 1 as the age calculation date. If the exit date is null, we use the last day of the school year as a proxy for the exit date. Okay, so update 5 was for those students who exit earlier than December 1 during the current school year, referred to in the specifications as the reporting year. Then we use the prior year December 1 date for calculating the age. Previously we were calculating everybody's age based on the current year December 1. So we fixed this, and this is going to result in fewer students being included in the file. There's 2 scenarios: students who are 14 on the current year December 1, but they exited before the current year December 1. We have to use their age from last year, which would have been 13. So these students won't be included in the file. And then we have students who are 21 in the current year December 1, and last year they would have been 20. So if they exit before December 1, we have to use 20 as their age. And EdFax won't allow us to submit a 20-year-old with the age out code. So even though they could have the age out code this year when they're 21, we can't send them in the EdFax file because the age we have to use for the student doesn't meet the requirements for the age out code. And this is probably one of those situations where when they put the rule in place, they didn't realize it would kind of have this weird impact where it's actually valid data, but because of this weird requirement, it looks like it's invalid. Luckily, this doesn't have a huge impact. I want to say it was like 3 students that it was impacted this year. Next slide, please. Okay, so the indicator 1 calculation. Now this calculation was new last year. Prior to last year, indicator 1, the graduation rate was the same as the 4-year cohort rate for students with disabilities. And starting last year, this graduation rate it's not really a graduation rate. It's more of a rate of out of the students who exited special ed, what percentage of them exited by graduating. And so the numerator is the students from the 009 report who earned a regular high school diploma, and the denominator includes students who graduated with the regular high school diploma, graduated with the alternate diploma, received a certificate of completion, reached maximum age, or dropped out. Next slide, please. Okay, and indicator 2 calculation. This had a minor change last year. It didn't have a huge impact on the dropout rates, which have always been not the same dropout rate that we're used to taking out of, which is out of the cohort, what percent dropped out. This is out of students who exited special ed, what percent exited as dropouts. Last year, they used to have us include students who died in the denominator, and last year they updated that. So those students aren't included in the denominator anymore. So the denominator for the indicator in the 1 and the indicator 2 are exactly the same. And the numerator for indicator 2 is students who dropped out rather than students who graduated. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are the impacts of these updates on indicators 1 and 2? So updates 1 and 5 are gonna, the impacts are gonna vary. There's fewer students that are gonna be in your denominators. If only the denominators changed, then we would expect grad rates to improve and dropout rates to be worse. But most likely, both the denominator and the numerator will be impacted by the changes. So there won't be any real clear patterns. But it's also hopefully a cleaner data set because of those additional filters we added for identifying who is enrolled at the start of the reporting period. And so hopefully those being a cleaner data set will have improved rates. Statewide, we do have improved graduation rate and dropout rate for I can't remember, by about a 0.5 percentage point or so. Okay, so updates 2 and 3 don't make any difference. And that's because those updates only switch kids from the move known to be continuing to the transfer, or the transfer to the move known to be continuing. And both of those are excluded from the denominators for indicators 1 and 2. So that doesn't impact the indicators. And then update 4, if the student exits special ed on the same day they graduate, the SCRAM exit code should be reported as X rather than A. If they're in SCRAM all the way until the last day of their enrollment, they're not really transferring out of special ed. They're done with school, they're exiting school. X is the code you should use, not A. If you used A in that scenario, the student would count as transfer to regular placement, and you would miss out on getting the student in your graduation rate, indicator 1. If the student exits special education significantly earlier than they exit special ed, ensure that A is used if the student returns to regular placement. Okay, and then implications for data entry. In update 1, prior year exit and completion codes really need to be updated by S1X or historical update. And current year records have to meet those membership and attendance minimum requirements and must not be marked school of record if you want to make sure they're going to be included in the data. Updates 2 and 3 really have no implications for data entry. That's because reporting exit and completion codes as accurately as possible has always been important. So that has not changed. The implication of update 4 is there's a few different things, but the most critical one is that if the student exits special education on the same day they graduate, the SCRAM exit code should be reported as X rather than A. Update 5, again, no change. Reporting birth dates and exit or completion codes as accurately as possible has always been important. And this update to this EdFact file does not change that. Okay, and here's your contact people for questions. myself for data and reporting, Lavinia for transition questions, and then Colby for advice questions. Okay, my next item is updates about UTREX validations. So last month I covered a problem we found with the S2621 and the S2622 validations, which cover SCRAM environments for the age grade combination. So we found in the October submission that we had records coming in with incorrect environment codes for the age grade combination. So we need to update the validation to catch these. In the meantime, we ask you to be hyper vigilant about using correct environment codes, as these are critical for December count data. Okay, so the first issue with this was with the 621 validation, where if the student is age 4 and in grade K-12, they still need to have an early childhood environment code. And the validation isn't catching that. It's letting them in with a school age environment code of V. There's 19 LEAs in the October data that had these. V is what you would appropriate for what you'd change them to as soon as they turn 5 and they're in kindergarten. But as long as they're still 4 in kindergarten, they still need one of these early childhood environment codes. Okay, and then, oh, next slide, please. Okay, oh, there. The first issue with the 622 validation is the inverse of what we found with the 621. 6-year-olds in preschool. Even though they're in preschool, they need a school age environment code. So we had one record of a 6-year-old in preschool who was coming through with a early childhood environment code, and that code is appropriate until the student, I think I should have said 6th birthday right there, not 5th. F was appropriate until the student's 6th birthday, because they would have been a 5-year-old in preschool. They can have a 5-year-old in preschool can have F, but as soon as they turn 6, they would need one of the school age environments, even though they're in preschool. And these are the school age environment codes. Okay, and then the second issue with the 622 validation is that it was checking, it wasn't checking records that have a future exit date, which some SIS systems will pre-populate exit date as the last day of school. So a couple records snuck in with the wrong environment code because the validation just wasn't even looking at them. And so that will be getting fixed, and the validation will turn on those students once it's fixed. Okay, next. Okay, so now my update from last month. Last month I wasn't able to give you an expected completion date on those validation fixes. Now I am. Those should be done by next Wednesday. Next steps, what to expect. I just wanted to put that out to you all, actually. Is this something you prefer a heads up information sooner than next Wednesday? I could identify all the LEAs that are impacted by these validations not catching these errors, and I could send out emails to you so you know in advance. You don't have to wait till those validations start triggering next week. Is that something that people would prefer? If you want to just put yes or no in the chat. If I don't see any yeses in there, I'm not going to bother. Okay, I see a lot of yeses. Okay, cool. I'll do that. I'll try to get that done tomorrow. Okay, next slide, please. Thanks for everybody's response. I appreciate that. Okay, the next, this is hot off the presses. I just learned about this today. The S2603 validation, which is about the developmental delay disability type. we have a rule change. So federal law allows students to be identified with the developmental delay disability type until their 9th birthday, but states can choose their own cutoff. And Utah previously chose 8 as the cutoff instead of 9. And this causes some problems on occasion when we get a student who transfers in from out of state and they're already 8, but they still have the DD disability type in that other state. And that school they transferred into has to immediately start an IEP meeting to do their eligibility determination, which causes a delay for them to be able to service the students. And so using the same eligibility or disability type as what the other state gave them allows that LEA to start providing services to the student right away without having to do the IEP meeting, which can be a long process. So we're going with 9 now instead of 8. So that means, if you'll go back, that means instead of the validation, instead of looking for triggering starting on their 8th birthday, it's going to trigger starting on their 9th birthday. The change is going to be effective in mid-January. So the validation, we're going to try to get that validation update done right around that time period by mid-January, so that if you have any students where they're just transferring in at that time, or your IEP team has already started meeting based on this news today and wants to do a new eligibility determination, then you can avoid having to deal with this validation still triggering on them when they're turning 8. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and that's it for me. Any questions you want me to address before we move on? Okay, feel free to email me anytime. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Malia. So I'll be talking now about the December 1 UTREX submission that's coming up and important data points to review and getting ready for that. Okay, deadlines to keep in mind: the December 1 submission deadline is Wednesday, December 7th by 5 p.m. So all December 1 data must be finalized by that date. Historical update requests that need to be included in your December finalized submission need to be submitted 2 weeks prior, which is Wednesday, November 23rd, again by 5 p.m. And just to note, historical updates can be submitted year-round. These deadlines just imply that we would guarantee that they will be done prior to the submission period, so they would be included in your finalized data. All right, and then some announcements about courtesy data reviews. The data and statistics team will start doing those reviews on Monday. So that's coming up in a few days. You can always request a review at any time before the December 7th deadline. So we will just do them for everyone starting Monday, but if you want a second review, you can request that, or if for some reason next week you need it sooner, just let us know. But that is the time frame. And then this next point was from last year, but it's still important to just keep on your radar. It's specifically for PowerSchool users. There was an issue in the past where the regular percent wasn't coming through correctly. So please just double check that and make sure that that is coming through correctly. If the values are being flipped between what's in your SIS and what's showing up on the UTREX report, then that means that the issue is occurring, and please let us know. The fix needs to happen in the SIF agent, and that can only be done by our IT team. You do not need to make any changes to your data, but please, if that issue does occur, do not finalize until we have verified that it's fixed in UTREX. So hopefully no one is having that issue, but just if you are on PowerSchool, keep in mind that that has happened in the past. So for everyone, the important data points to review for this submission. The first one that we'll be looking at by way of total counts, the pre-K and K-12 special ed totals. These are important and should be paid attention to because they are determined funding. What we will look for in the courtesy data review and what you should be looking for is changes in your totals from last year. For a student to be included in those totals, the following criteria must be met. So they can't have a fatal error on them. Those need to be cleared. They must have an active SCRAM record on December 1st. SCRAM entry date on or before December 1st. And the SCRAM exit date is either blank or it's after December 1st. So these are similar to the October 1 criteria, but this is specific to SCRAM, so keep that in mind. Next, the student must be between the ages of 3 and 22, and that birth date is coming from the SSID system. So please make sure that what you have for birth date in your SIS matches what's in the SSID. The next criteria to be included in the count is that they can't have environment code P, that is excluded. And then school of record no is excluded. So it must be their school of record. The next important items that we review for December 1 are services. So we look at the time, regular, percent, and environment codes. The reason that these are important, they are used in OSEP indicator measures that Malia was talking about earlier. What we look for is large changes from last year or anything that's unexpected with how these codes are reported. So an example, we usually see the majority time A for elementary, and then a more equal distribution between time A and time B in middle school, and then usually higher counts of time C, which is self-contained in high school. Again, this might not be the pattern for all LEAs, and it doesn't mean that your data is wrong. This is just a general expectation, and so it doesn't mean that your data is wrong if we put it in the review letter. It just means to check it and double check that it is correct. The next item, we will look at the 1% flag. So students reported as 1%. The reason that this is important is because this data is used for test rostering, projecting alternate assessment rates, and monitoring. What we look for, again, is large changes from last year or anything unexpected with how the status is reported. Disability types that should not be reported as 1%, BD and SL. We've talked about that in depth. Malia went over that. In the future, there will be a fatal error on that. And Russell, you did ask earlier, this will be on the courtesy data review, so we will be marking that. It could be a data entry error, and if so, then we would ask you to fix that. But if we flag that you have 1% students who have those 2 disability types marked, and that's what your IEP team determined, then they will need to meet again to update the determination. The next item that we will review is the homeless counts. The reason that these are important in December is that they are used for funding. What we look for is large changes from last year. And especially if you report 0 this year and last year you had a count, it could be that that's correct, but we will be flagging that for you to double check. And again, those need to be finalized in December for funding purposes. All right, the next item that we will be looking at are the beginning of year reading data. So missing beginning of year reading intervention and or reading on grade level status data. The reason that this is important is because we've passed that first testing session now. And so if you get that data entered now, it allows you to avoid having to do all of it at year end. And so this is sort of a courtesy check for you to say, hey, you haven't entered this yet, please get it entered, so that you don't have to get it all entered at year end. If a student doesn't have an Acadience reading test record, we need to know why. This is also where you report alternate assessment statuses. If there's no test record and no status given, the student will be treated as untested in the participation rate calculations. The places that you can check these counts, the school summary cumulative report will show you the aggregate counts. And then you can use the examine data file or the reading on grade level for UG report to look at the student level data. And that will show you, if we flag you for, you have 10 students with blank statuses, these reports will show you which students have not had a status reported or a reading intervention reported. This is new this year. We'll be looking at similar to the reading data, we'll be looking at the beginning of year math data. Missing beginning of year early numeracy intervention and or early numeracy statuses. And again, the reasoning is the same, to avoid having to do it all at year end. If a student does not have an Acadience math test record, we need to know why. This is also where you report the alternate assessment status. If there's no test record and no status, then the student is treated as untested in the participation rate calculations. And this one, we don't have a specific report yet. So you can use the examine data file to review the student level data, and that will show you which students don't have a beginning of year early numeracy status entered or intervention reported. And then these are the guidance given in the UTREC specifications for the reading on grade level data and the early numeracy data. Specific to early numeracy, this is important because there hasn't been a fatal error on this on the early numeracy intervention field yet. It was a warning at year end, but it will start triggering this upcoming year end. So the early numeracy intervention fields do need to be entered because it will be a fatal error. All SAS systems are required to be able to submit early numeracy data this school year, and the data is subject to the following validations. So I already talked about the intervention one, but there's also validation for beginning of year, middle of year, and end of year early numeracy status fields. And this is similar to the reading data. So please make sure that you are submitting the early numeracy data. All right, and then here is resources. The UTREX December guidelines, the current UTREX specifications for this school year. There's a UTREX quick help guide. If you need technical help during the submission, you can email the app help desk or create a ticket directly. And then if you have questions about your data or courtesy data review, you can email data and statistics for help. Are there any questions related to the December 1 data points that we will be reviewing or the submission coming up? And if you think of questions, you can email those either to myself or the Data and Statistics Help email address. All right, if there's no questions for December 1, then we'll go to our last agenda item. And this is actually items that we've received from you. So every month every meeting that we have on the agenda to please email us if you have items that you would like us to discuss. So we appreciate when you do have items because it's helpful for us to include those in our meetings. So we did get a couple of items sent in, and Kristen, feel free to jump in at any point. These questions were sent in by an LEA, but if any other LEAs have feedback or want to talk about this, this is meant to be an open-ended discussion. So the first question was sent in: can course changes for next school year 23-24 be finalized by January? And Kristen Campbell from our USBE team says that the goal is for them to be finalized and sent out to LEAs by January 10th. But she cannot always control when things are sent to her late, which causes for her to have to update things after January. So I don't know, Kristen, if you're still on.
I am. And I'm going to try just to get a list out by January 10th and just recognize that if we have specialists that turn in forms for new courses, that we'll just update it as we get them. In addition, we are expecting some 6th grade middle school courses to be added this year. These are for 6th grades that are in middle school versus 6th grades that are in elementary. That's just kind of a heads up.
All right. Are there any other LEAs that have feedback about that item or announcement? Okay, if not, the goal for those, so the answer is yes. Kristen is aiming to have those sent out by January 10th. The second item that was sent in: should we consider adding codes for the term field in the course master? This may also affect semester length. And again, Kristen can jump in if she wants, but she looked over the UTREX specifications and doesn't think that the way we're collecting this data, if we were to make a change, would be a problem. But it's not up to us. The UTREX team is ultimately the ones that have to make the change. And so it's a question of whether or not they have the resources to do that and how quickly they can do that. So we would need to bring that to Cliff's team, but opening it up to the group, are there other LEAs that this is something that they would want changed or have noticed issues with in reporting? All right, well, I'll take silence as a no, but we will still bring this up to Cliff's team to see if that is a change that we can get into effect. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. And then the last item is the cumulative GPA calculation based on courses taken in grades 9 through 12 or all courses from the transcript. And this was in reference to some SOEP students that are in grades 7 and 8, and whether or not those course grades should be counted in the cumulative GPA. Again, I got feedback from Kristen, and she is still looking into this with higher ed. But her initial response was that this is an LEA decision. However, the recommendation from higher ed is that cumulative GPA should be based on courses only in grades 9 through 12. Again, she's looking more into that, but the initial response is that those credits outside of grades 9 through 12 can count towards graduation, but they shouldn't be included in the GPA. Kristen, did you have anything more to add on that?
I did send an email today. I did not realize that there is a admissions to the universities in Utah, including BYU. And I sent out an email to them to see what their response would be. We're more concerned that, we don't make liars of students when they apply for college or for scholarships, and it says, only use information that you did in grades 9 through 12. But I will, as soon as I have an update from that group, I will let you know.
All right, thank you. So we appreciate getting these items sent in, and we will send out in the notes any further answers that we get when I send out the slides and recording. And with that being said, do we have any other questions related to this or anything else? All right, Aaron, I don't know if you're still on. He might have jumped off. Well, we can go ahead and end then, and just remember that the December submission is coming up, and we hope you all have a good Thanksgiving next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, can you look up Jeff? Oh, we're still on.